All right, well, good evening, everyone. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. We've got 5 weeks left, and I believe it's 6 chapters left, so I'm not panicking. We're going to be okay. But the good thing is we're kind of getting out of short stories in Acts and a little bit more into like long prose, that type of thing. So we kind of actually do need to read more of a chapter all at once from this point forward. So just a reminder, we are in Jerusalem. Paul has finished his third missionary journey. He is back in Jerusalem now. Remember, he was basically attacked by the Jews. They captured him. The Romans put him into bonds, and then he let them know that he was a Roman citizen. And so now the Romans are trying to figure out, okay, we're in trouble. What do we do? And so the Romans don't understand what the issue is. So they're giving Paul over to the Sanhedrin for a trial, okay? And we're still in about 58 AD. All right, so here we go. Starting in verse 1, this is in Acts chapter 23. I do recommend you open your own Bibles for this. It's going to be a little hard to read. Verse 1, Paul, looking intently at the council, said, "Brethren, I have lived my life with a perfectly good conscience before God up till this day." The high priest, Ananias, commanded those standing beside him to strike him on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, "God is going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit and to try me according to law, and yet in violation of the law order me to be struck?" Okay, so first of all, this is roughly 22 years since Paul was a member of the court of the Sanhedrin. So think about that. Do you remember where you were 22 years ago? It's 2022, so it's actually kind of an easy year to figure out. Anyway, so around the year 2000, right, where were you? How much have you changed in the course of 22 years, right? For my kids, a lot, since they weren't alive then. He has, I'm sure, obviously the first year or two of that was huge for him. But even past that, think about how much more mature Paul is in this time. So history records Ananias as being very violent and cruel. He was assassinated about 10 years after this incident. Regarding the striking on the mouth. Okay, so this was very hypocritical of Ananias. The spirit of law of Moses allowed one to be heard before judgment. So basically, the high priest is just skipping over the hearing part, right? Hypocriticism, being hypocritical is, in my opinion, one of the worst ways to undermine whatever message it is that you have to give, right? If I tell you that, hey, you need to never wear, the color blue, then I'm in trouble, right? If I tell you that, you need to do things this way, and yet I don't, it's easy to tell our kids, hey, don't do what I do what I say, right? Does that actually work? No. So in this case, the high priest is being extremely hypocritical. Now, whitewashed wall. What does that mean? What does whitewashing mean? To cover it up, exactly. So imagine a wall that is decayed. The bricks are crumbling. The mortar is turning to sand. It's got holes all in it. You put a nice coat of white paint on it, though. Looks kind of trendy, right? It could be nice looking. Is it structurally sound? No. That is exactly Paul's message here, is that the high priest and the whole Sanhedrin, they look like they're filling the part. They look like they're doing the right things, but on the inside, they're crumbling. Morally, they are corrupt. Okay, any comments or questions? All right, moving on to verse 4. But the bystander said, "Do you revile God's high priest?" And Paul said, "I was not aware, brethren, that he was high priest. For it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." But perceiving that one group were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, Paul began crying out in the council, "Brethren, I am a Pharisee, a son of the Pharisees. I am on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead." Okay, why did Paul say this? Yeah, exactly, to start a fight. Everyone was against him. He wanted to start a fight. Why would this start a fight? Yes? Exactly. The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. It's sad, you see. So if you remember nothing else from this whole course, it's sad, you see. They don't believe in, they actually don't believe in the spiritual realm, right? They don't believe in resurrection, in an afterlife, that type of thing. And so, they don't believe that God has very direct action on the earth, I guess you could say, something like that. Probably a better way to phrase that. So effectively, Paul is saying, hey, I'm a Pharisee, and specifically, I'm on trial for the resurrection of the dead. Now, all of a sudden, all the Pharisees, if they say, hey, we're going to attack, they're attacking their own platform in the presence of the Sadducees. So they can't do it. So what do the Pharisees do? Verse 7, as he said this, there occurred a dissension between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, nor an angel, nor a spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. And there occurred a great uproar, and some of the scribes of the Pharisaic party stood up and began arguing heatedly, saying, we find nothing wrong with this man. Suppose a spirit or an angel has spoken to him. They're almost defending Paul now, specifically because they don't want to lose face in front of the Sadducees. Now, I think that was pretty brilliant on Paul, on his part. They're not defending him as in the sense of defending his Christianity, obviously, but he has changed the topic. All right, verse 10. And a great dissension was developing. The commander was afraid Paul would be torn to pieces by them and ordered the troops to go down and to take him away from them by force and bring them into the barracks. But on the night immediately following, the Lord stood at his side and said, take courage, for as you have solemnly witnessed to my cause at Jerusalem, so you must witness at Rome also. All right, a couple of things here. This is a New American Standard Version. They tend to translate into words we would most understand. So commander, we kind of understand it's a leader of some sort. Apparently this is chiliarch, which I had never heard before. But anyway, chiliarch is a leader of 1,000 troops. So a centurion, I think we all know that, that's a leader of 100 troops. And so basically a chiliarch is a leader of 10 centurions, their groups. So this would be a very high up in the military person that he's talking to here. All right, so here God is making Paul a promise, right? He said, hey, it's going to be okay. You're going to be a witness at Rome also. Now, when is he going to be a witness at Rome? Does God say? No. God has his own timeline. He has his own period. Paul would probably prefer to be in Rome right now if he could, but that's not in God's plan, and so it takes a little bit longer. All right, verse 12. So, as if they weren't corrupt enough, verse 12. When it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. There were more than 40 who formed this plot. They came to the chief priest and the elders and said, we have bound ourselves under a solemn oath to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you and the council notify the commander to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case by a more thorough investigation. And we, for our part, are ready to slay him before he comes near the place. Do we want to count the number of commandments they're breaking here? Okay, so obviously there's murder. I think we all got that one. How about in verse 15? Now, therefore, you and your council notify the commander and lie to him, right? How about bearing false witness, right? These are the leaders of the Jews, right? Well, okay, specifically the conspiracy isn't the high priest directly, but they're going to the high priest. And are the high priests stopping it? No, they're going along with it. They're like, yeah, that sounds about right. This is terrible. Okay, so when it says that they, in verse 12, they bound themselves under an oath, in Greek it's anathematize, which means to place under a curse. You might have heard anathema. That is anathema. So it's like a curse, something like that. Now, note who they're conspiring with is the chief priest, and not one, but multiple. So it is at least many of the priests who they were conspiring with. and the priests are just kind of going along with it. All right, here we find out a little bit about Paul's family. But the son of Paul's sister, so that would be his nephew, heard of their ambush, and he came and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Lead this young man to the commander, for he has something to report to him." So he took him and led him to the commander and said, "Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to lead this young man to you, since he has something to tell you." The commander took him by the hand and, stepping aside, began to inquire of him privately, "What is it that you have to report to me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down tomorrow to the council, as though they were going to inquire something more thoroughly about them. So do not listen to them, for more than 40 of them are lying in wait for him, who have bound themselves under a curse not to eat or drink until they slay him. And now they are ready and waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man go, instructing him, "Tell no one that you have notified me of these things." Okay, so the Roman commander here, what are his concerns at this point? A riot starting. So that's the number one. If a riot starts under his command, he's toast, right? All right, perfect. What else does he have to worry about? Murder? Murder of who? A Roman citizen who is his prison, who is his prisoner. So it's a citizen of Rome who, yeah, that's the right way to say it. It sounds strange. He was not a citizen of the city of Rome. He was a citizen of the Roman Empire. He is responsible for Paul. Remember, if they escape, then the jailer gets killed, right? It's pretty much similar here. If Paul is killed under his command, then he might be put to death as well. So now this commander has this person who he's got to keep safe in a hostile city. So what do you think he's going to do? How many movies do y'all watch? Right. All right, so have you ever seen it that you've got a really high-profile I hate to say convicted person, someone who's been arrested, who's really high-profile, and they're trying to protect him? So how do they send him out of the jail? Like, you got 3 different cars going, all unmarked, right? And they're all going different directions so that, you can't track them, that type of thing. That's actually what we're about to see. It's very similar to that. It's kind of neat. All right, so in verse 23, so Paul is going to be moved to Caesarea, and he called to him 2 of the centurions, so that's about 200 people under his command, "Get 200 soldiers ready by the 3rd hour of the night," about 9-ish, "to proceed to Caesarea with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. They were also to provide mounts to put Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor." So they're going to do this at night. They're going to send hundreds of people with him. They are doing everything they can not to be attacked, and fortunately they were successful. So this commander, he can't just send his prisoner out and be like, "Well, hey, Felix, you take care of it," right? No, he's got to explain to his boss, I guess, why he's doing it and back up that, "Hey, I'm doing everything I can. This is the right decision. This is why." So he writes a letter. He says, "Claudius Lysias," that's his name, "to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. When this man was arrested by the Jews and was about to be slain by them, I came up to them with the troops and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman." Is that exactly correct? No, he's kind of changing the timeline a little bit, right? He saw that there was a riot, a mob, something like that. So he went up, arrested Paul, put him in bonds, remember, hands and feet, took him away, was about to start flogging him, and that's when he found out he was a Roman citizen. So what he's writing here is not exactly the truth. All right, verse 28. "And wanting to ascertain the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council," which is correct, "and I found him to be accused over questions about their law, but under no accusation deserving death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, also instructing his accusers to bring charges against him before you." So, verse 29 in particular, he's saying he doesn't understand why this is even a major issue, right? Now, he has to prevent the riot. He understands that could be major, but he doesn't understand why there would be a riot. The way he phrases it, and I found him to be accused over questions about their law. Remember, they were kind of self-governing as long as they stayed within bounds. So he saw it kind of as law. He knows it's a religion, too. He knows this is a religious issue. But he says, hey, this does not make any sense about why it would deserve death or imprisonment. All right, so verse 31. So the soldiers, in accordance with their orders, took Paul and brought him by the night to Antipatris. But the next day, leaving the horsemen to go on with him, they returned to the barracks. When these had come to Caesarea and delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. When he had read it, that was Felix, he asked from what province he was, and when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing after your accusers arrive also, giving orders for him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. Okay, so this is pretty reasonable, honestly. He can't make a judgment here. You can't make a judgment with only a defendant. You have to have the accusers to tell you what's going on. Yeah, go. No, I'm done.
I just want to say, from what we've read so far, we're seeing a perfect example of God's providence at work here, because the Romans were not trying to protect Paul because he was an apostle or because he wasn't a Christian.
Exactly.
They were protecting him because he was a Roman.
Citizen. Exactly.
And when we think about what God says in Romans chapter 13, when we talk about governments being a minister of God for good, a lot of times I think we're biased about the fact that in our country, for a long time, maybe not so much recently because of the way they've been behaving, but we perceive the government as kind of being friendly,
right.
As kind of benevolent towards the people. But at the time this was written, the government wasn't benevolent toward the people. So I think this is a perfect example of God using the governments that are in power to accomplish his will. They're using their own free will for their own purposes. That commander was bragging, trying to get some reward. Look what I've done. I've saved this whole citizen. They all had their self-interest at heart in doing it. But in the process, they were protecting God's apostle. They were protecting one of his people and giving him free passage to Rome.
Yes.
Where later he's going to have
We haven't got to that part yet.
Yeah, where later he's going to have an audience that he never would have had otherwise if he hadn't appealed to Caesar for his case. So God's using all of these people's free will to accomplish his purpose, and people are hearing the gospel that wouldn't have otherwise heard it.
That's exactly right. And actually, the Romans in general are a good example of that. Obviously, they were persecuting the Christians early on, but what were they doing? They were building roads. You've heard, all roads lead to Rome. Those roads make travel easier and faster. Well, guess what also that means? It means that you can send out the missionaries much easier. They can get farther, and you can spread the gospel easier. Okay, so he's about to go to and be kept in Herod's praetorium. A praetorium is basically his official governor's residence. I guess you could call it the governor's mansion. So this is what's left of it. It's a nice location. If you see, it's a little hard to see, but there's like I don't know what the right term for this is. It's not a circus. That's the round one. But anyway, the what? A racetrack, yeah. There's a Roman name for it. But anyway, yeah, it's a racetrack, right? So there is, what was that, the movie? Ben-Hur, thank you. Ben-Hur, where they're racing the chariots around. It probably was not filmed there, but you could imagine it. But that's actually not the praetorium. The praetorium is this grouping there. So it looks like they've got gardens here and stuff like that. This is the very much ruins of the building. I did find one architect's rendering of what it would have looked like. So talk about a nice place, right? So does it look like a nice place to be, right? This was effectively house arrest, but it wasn't his house, and it was a really nice house, right? So this is an opportunity for Paul, isn't it? Now remember, we said God didn't say when he was getting to Rome. He's going to be there for a while. So in verse 1 of chapter 24. Oh, yeah.
Another point, back kind of to what Rocky was saying there. Look who protected Paul. It's the only place that we know of his family being involved. and his
That's a good
mom and a nephew was there. And it's
Yep.
funny, because we don't know where they were members of the church. We know she was Jewish.
That's
we
true.
don't know how the son was raised as a Roman or as a Jew. We know nothing about that. But here he steps in and in the Christian light, as far as we're concerned, and comes in and tells Paul what's happening, and then sends him on to go to the ruler.
And it kind of makes you wonder a little bit about how they made it to Jerusalem too. Because remember, Paul's not originally from Jerusalem. So did they come with him? You know, how did that all work? We really don't have much evidence in the Bible. Okay, any comments before we go to chapter 24?
Yeah. Because Paul says earlier he's a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. This is his sister's son. So obviously that family was raised in the Pharisaical doctrine. So this sister, whether she converted over to Christianity because of Paul or not, we don't know. But at least she stayed, or her family stayed loyal enough to Paul that her nephew saved him.
Yes, exactly. All right, so in verse 1, and we are in chapter 24 now. After 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and with an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. After Paul had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, "Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. But that I may not weary you any further, I beg you to grant us by your kindness a brief hearing." So, literally the word that's translated here in my version, lawyer, means orator. What's an orator? Someone who is better at talking than I am, right? Someone who has flowery speech and is able to hold people's attention. And so here, he has been brought forth to talk to the governor in a way that will convince the governor to kill Paul or give him over to them. Yes? Well, okay.
He's saying things that here's how we Jews feel about you Romans.
Yeah.
And the Jews didn't feel that way.
No, they didn't
at
feel
all.
that way at all.
He's
No.
a typical, what we think
Lawyer.
a lot of
Okay,
politicians
how many
say.
lawyers do we have in the room?
Say things
Okay,
that
we're good,
actually-
right?
Yeah, he's lying to them to get on his good side.
You're absolutely right. He is not being forthcoming. Okay, so going to verse 5. For we have, first of all, notice he was very nice, at least talking to Felix, very nice, and everything sounds pretty upbeat. For we have found this man to be a real pest, and fellows who stirs up dissension amongst the Jews and throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him. We wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysias, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accusers to come before you. By examining him yourself concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things of which we accuse him. Okay, so maybe we don't particularly care for the guy, but he's doing a pretty good job, right, for his side. So first of all, again, what do the Romans want least out of anything? Dissension, riots, all that. So what does he say? This man stirs up dissension. That will get the governor's attention. That's number one no-no. In verse 2, no, sorry, still verse 5, he says the sect of the Nazarenes. Now we've heard the Romans call Christianity a sect many times, mainly earlier, obviously. But here it's the Jews themselves who are calling this a sect. Okay, so when you hear the word sect, S-E-C-T, do think like section, right? A division, something like that. In more modern language, what would we say? A denomination, right? Okay, so in a minute, we're going to get to Paul's rebuttal. So I want y'all to remember, they're accusing Paul of being a member of a sect, a division, a small grouping within that. In verse 7, it says, basically we were being perfectly rational people. We had arrested them, no big deal. They're trying to kill him. And it was the commander who, with much violence, took him out of our hands. So he's lying, right? And now, in all fairness, the Romans were going to flog Paul. So yes, there was violence there as well, but they didn't. for what it's worth. Now, I think in verse, where was it? In verse 6, it says, he even tried to desecrate the temple. I think this might have caught the governor's attention too, because the Romans and the Greeks, they both had many, many temples, right? Like they had many, many people, or not people, but whatever you say, imaginary things that they call gods and temples to them. So desecrating a temple was a real thing to a Roman. They would understand it. Maybe they wouldn't say, hey, that was real, but they would at least understand that that was bad. Now, why did they accuse him of it? Like, what was their original thinking, or what they said it was anyway? I remember? Exactly. They saw him in town with a Greek, Trophimus, and he was Ephesian specifically. And so they assumed that they had taken him into the temple, that Paul had taken him into the temple. Now, that actually wasn't true. All right, verse 9. The Jews also joined in the attack, asserting that these things were so. Right, so you got the prosecution going. When the governor had nodded for him to speak, Paul responded, knowing that for many years you have been a judge to this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. Since you can take note of the fact that no more than 12 days ago, I went up to Jerusalem to worship. Neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, nor in the city itself did they find me carrying on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot. Now that's all true, isn't it? Now, is it true that he hadn't had any discussions with anybody? No. What he's saying is, the Jews don't even know what discussions I was having with who, anything like that. He didn't cause a riot. He was just talking, and other people suddenly started pouncing on him. In verse 13, nor can they prove to you the charges of which they now accuse me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there shall certainly be a resurrection, remember the Pharisees, of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience before God and before men. He's pretty quick to do two things. One is to proclaim the gospel, right? Now, he hasn't given the whole gospel here, but he is proclaiming God here. But also notice he's saying, hey, they call this a sect. This is the way. This is the same continuum. And I think we need to be just as honest and open about that when we talk to others. So obviously we have to do this out of love. We have to be respectful and all that. But when someone says, hey, what denomination are you? I don't think it's okay to say, oh, well, I go to the Church of Christ and move on, right? I think we need to say, well, I'm not a member of a denomination. I'm a Christian. Now, obviously, they're probably going to ask a lot more questions. Okay, great. Ask away, right? But Paul is very clear that this is not a denomination, a sect, a division. This is the way. I think that's really important. Any comments, questions on that? Rocky?
To add a thought real quick on what you just said, he not only said that, he said, I am belonging to the way that you read about in the Jewish scriptures that they should know about. So, as you say, we should say we're a member of the church that you read about in the Bible.
Yes.
Which we do say.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
So it's analogous to that, exactly.
Yeah. Now, I have to admit, when I was, I don't know, something like 5 or something, maybe 6, I was, I don't even know how I got there. But anyway, I was talking to this rather old lady. I was 5 or 6. She was probably only 50. But anyway, so I was talking, I mean, what did I know? But anyway, so I was talking to this lady, and she asked me, oh, well, what denomination are you? And my answer was, Church of Christian? I didn't know enough at the time to even answer. But hey, I learned from that, right? I learned that I need to better understand. All right, verse 17. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings, in which they found me occupied in the temple, having been purified without any crowd or uproar. But there were some Jews from Asia who ought to have been present before you and to make accusation if they should find anything against me. Or else let these men counsel themselves, Or else let these men themselves tell what misdeed they have found when I stood before the council, other than for this one statement which I shouted while standing amongst them, for the resurrection of the dead I am on trial before you today. All right, so I tell you what, let's keep going with this next section first. But Felix, having a more exact knowledge about the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders for the centurion, to the centurion, for him to be kept in custody and yet have some freedom, and not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. But some days later, Felix arrived with Drusilla, his wife, who was a Jewess, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. Okay, so thank you. So Paul's presented his case. Felix, for whatever reason, he decides not to actually say, okay, this is what we're going to do. But he says, let me hear the commander. Okay, I can see that. There is a third party here who was present for the events, so maybe that is a little bit more information. But he also has a more exact knowledge about the way. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. We're about to see that he's not a Christian, but he has heard something, right? He knows something about Christianity. He knows enough and is interested enough to go with his wife Drusilla, who is Jewish, to hear Paul speak. So this goes back to Rocky's point. Basically, God is using this whole thing to preach the gospel, to have it spread.
I think what you have, too, is the way that him being a politician, he wants to know as much as he can about this book.
That's a good point.
So he would want to hear many things about it. We talked about it, stepping out and said, okay, I'm a politician, I know the Jews are out here, I know the Nazarenes are out here, what do they both believe so I can...
Yeah. So I do agree with you, saying that he, as a governor, or as a leader, he wants to have as much information as he can about the different groups of people. But I think it says something that he brought his wife with him. I think to me that sounds like he was a little bit more open. Yeah, Matt?
Yeah, I agree with you, because it says he cut them off. Verse
Yeah,
22.
he does.
That makes it seem like he's kind of like brushing them aside.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in verse 24 it says, and he gave him some freedom and let his friends administer it.
Right. I mean, he's being pretty nice to him. Yeah. So I think it's probably a combination. Absolutely, I agree. He wants to know as much about the people he's governing as he can, which makes him pretty smart. And unfortunately, I think there's also an undertone to this that we'll see in just a second. Ooh, that's a good point, too. With his wife being Jewish, he wants her input. Okay, verse 25. But as he was discussing righteousness, that would be Paul, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you. At the same time, too, he was hoping that some money would be given him by Paul. Therefore, he also used to send for him quite often and converse with him. But after 2 years had passed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. So, at first, as you read this, it's like, hey, this seems like a pretty reasonable governor, you know, all that. He's making the right decisions. 2 years, right to a speedy trial? I guess that's not a thing. This reminds me in verse 25, though, of the song, Why Not Tonight, right? Felix hears the message, and he becomes frightened, but he doesn't do the right thing. He's like, just, let's back off. Let's get away for a minute, because I'll find time later. Not a good way to go. Okay, well, that is actually the end of time and end of the chapter 24, luckily. Any comments or questions before we close? Yes, Rocky?
Situation like today, there would be a temptation for some people to say, we need to go protest because he's being held falsely. He's being falsely arrested. You know, he hasn't had trial. What would have been the consequences of that?
Ooh,
it would have been severe for Paul. It would have been severe for the church.
Yeah.
And so we have to get out of that mindset there, that Paul was willing to be done wrong in that respect. And the fact that people could come and sing, Christians could come and sing, no doubt, he was probably trying to calm them down too. Said, this is in God's hands, don't worry about it.
And
But
being a good
sometimes
witness.
we want to do things our way and it would be different. The other thing is how many people would have thought, just bribe the man and get him loose. Look
That-
how much more
it did
good
sound-
could be done if we just paid a man and let Paul
It does
loose.
sound like he would
And
have
that would
accepted the
have been wrong
bribe.
too.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Okay, let's close out with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this day that you've come, that you've given to us. Dear Lord, we ask that as we go out, we take what we've learned here today and apply it to our lives. Please help keep us safe until the next appointed time. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.